Hi guys. So someone asked me to recount some of my adventures in the astral travel, mental travel things I've done in my life. And I know I've mentioned a few of them here and there, but I haven't, really gone into gobs of detail, I don't think. So I guess we'll see where this goes. So thinking back, um, I know when I was pretty little I used to travel through the solar system. I've talked about taking rides on comets and things like that, and going to other planets to try and meet the beings that were there. And because my father bought me a telescope, I think when I was probably about 8 or 9, maybe something like that. And we always talked about astronomy and the stars and that kind of thing. And I learned about the solar system and I was interested in it. And I was really curious about all the different things that were going on out there. And I had a lot of spontaneous events. I think that they were what I would describe as mental travel mostly rather than astral travel, because usually I was aware of my body at the same time as I was aware of being somewhere else. So it was sort of like seeing through astral or mental eyes, and but still being inside connected to my body. And there was one day when me and my sister were walking in our neighborhood. We were living on base in Rhode Island at the time, so it was, I'm pretty sure, well before 8th grade. So I was probably in 6th or 7th grade, maybe earlier, I'm not sure. It's hard to remember exactly how old I was when some of these things took place. And but I remember the event very vividly because my sister and I fought a fair amount, probably because of being in such a toxic home environment with all the violence and everything. Fighting each other seemed to be part of our pattern, coping mechanism or something like that. And we were having a rare day where we were just enjoying one another's company, and we were holding hands and walking, and the sun was bright and warm. It was a nice sunny day, and I remembered closing my eyes when I was walking and thinking about the sun and wondering about it and what it looked like. And I suddenly found myself floating above the sun, looking down, and I was surprised because what I saw looked like rivers and mountains, all made out of fire, but they were different colors, and there were features on the sun. And I was pretty young because I probably was 4th grade maybe. What we had learned at the time about the sun was made me think that it was just a homogeneous ball of fire. There was no indication of features or anything like that, so I was startled and surprised by what I saw. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And it wasn't until we started putting probes in space and telescopes in space and started getting better pictures of the sun and studying it and so forth, that they started to talk about the features of the sun and how different fires were different temperatures, and so because they were different temperatures or burning different things, they were different densities and different colors, and so some would sink and some would rise, and it would appear as if there were valleys and rivers and mountains made out of molten fire. And I was extremely excited. I think that was in the 60s that I found that out, sometime in the 60s. And I thought, how cool that my experience of seeing the sun was accurate and that what I saw was real, even though I was walking in the sun with my sister. So I had a lot of kind of spontaneous events similar to that, where I would suddenly find myself out and about. Um, Most of them I probably at this point don't remember because, it's kind of like, do you remember how many breaths you took in a day, sort of thing? Because it was just sort of a normal kind of thing. When I thought about something, a lot of times I found myself looking at something that I was thinking about, which was kind of interesting. So in these stories, there's really no, I don't talk about them specifically like that because my goal with the channel has been to try and share what I've learned and what other people might be able to learn from what I've learned. And being able to do this spontaneously since I was little, there's not really a method. It's just the way I am. But I've been able to hone it in certain circumstances for sure. And I had an experience that happened when we lived in Virginia. We moved from Rhode Island to Virginia when I was in 8th grade. The 8th grade was in 1963 because that was the year that Kennedy was assassinated. And I attended 3 different high schools, or schools, 8th grade schools, during that year because we were moving from Rhode Island down to Virginia. And so the first school was my regular school up in Rhode Island, and then we moved to New Jersey for a period of time while our house was being built. And that was the school I was in when the assassination happened, because it was one of those memorable events for me. And then in January of the next year, so 64, we moved the rest of the way to Virginia, and I was at a 3rd school. So academically speaking, it was pretty much all over the place. Every school was in a different place and different location and that kind of thing. Why was I talking about that now? We're talking about okay. So I moved to Virginia, and I think this was like after we left my father and had moved out of that house to a series of apartments. And I was traveling back and forth to the city, and there was a guy at the bus stop, and I looked at him, our eyes locked, and all of a sudden I felt a specific presence. And it seemed like someone else was looking out from his eyes. So that was sort of odd. It kind of put me on edge. And then I was at a coffee shop a week later with a friend, and there was a guy in the restaurant, a different guy in the restaurant. He was sitting across from me on the aisle. We were in one of those islands. I think it was like a J.C. Penney's kind of lunch counter type of situation. And he was sitting across from me, supposedly reading a paper and drinking a cup of coffee, although he wasn't doing either thing. And the person sitting next to me noticed that he was staring at me. And so he pointed him out, and I looked up, and our eyes locked, and I felt the same presence. And that startled me because, like, okay, now I've seen 2 different people, but they feel like the same person. And then it happened a 3rd time, and then someone was following me from store to store. My mother and sister were with me when that happened, and he like appeared in the grocery store we were at. We left that. We went to like a fast food place. He appeared there, which is like, miles away. How did that happen? And I think a 3rd location that we went to, he appeared there. So at this point, I was kind of freaking out a little bit. And I suddenly had this knowing, whether it turns out to be true or not. My knowing was that the government was actually had started a psychic program and was looking for recruits, and somehow I had gotten on their radar, maybe because of my astral traveling randomly here and there. Someone saw me and followed me and found out where I was, or whatever, and they started watching me through other people. It sounds kind of bizarre, but it certainly felt extremely real at the time. And I did not want to become a part of the program. And so that's when I decided to move to Canada. That was definitely part of my process of moving to Canada the first time. And interestingly enough, after years of being back and forth to Canada, I met someone else who actually encountered the same thing from the Canadian side, and he had actually been on an airplane with a U.S. general who had a feeling he might be gifted, and started talking to him and was telling him about a program that maybe he would be interested in joining. And he said no, and he said after they landed, he followed the guy, and he followed him straight to 10 Downing Street. So he was going to see the Prime Minister of England at the time, whoever that was. And I thought that was interesting. And then the reports started coming out about some of the secret programs, like the recent movie, Men Who Stare at Goats, but long before that we'd heard about it and, watched some of the documentaries about it. And I'm like, I told people about this, but nobody believed me. But I had, in between that time and now, when I was back in the States with my first husband, we went on a cross-country trip. We went from Virginia or Maryland. I think we were in Maryland then. We went from Maryland across the country to California, back up to British Columbia, and then across the country over to Toronto, and then through to Detroit and back down. So we did this kind of big, long circuit. And we were traveling on the highway in Tennessee, I believe, and I was bored. I mean, there really wasn't much to do on a long trip. It was like another bright, kind of sunny day, but nothing was interesting. And so I closed my eyes and kind of popped out of my body and was kind of wandering around briefly. And I thought, I've never looked under a highway. I wonder what's under a highway. And so I dove down under the highway and came into an underground secret military base. And I was just like, what? This is not what I expected to find when I randomly decided to pop down under an asphalt road and found this. There was all these people and hallways and things. I started wandering around just looking at stuff. Then apparently somebody noticed me. And I noticed that somebody noticed me. And I thought, uh-oh, they have a psychic on staff. And I've been found out. And so I left really quickly and back to the car, jumped in my body, or woke up in my body, however that works. And I told everybody, I said, guess what? We're driving over a secret military base. And we're talking, all you can see on the surface is like the Appalachian mountain kind of things, low sloping mountains and covered with trees. It's nothing to see. And I'm telling them this, and they're highly skeptical, which I totally understand. I would be skeptical too. And all of a sudden, these military vehicles start showing up on the in between the mountains and stuff, on these dirt roads that we didn't realize were there on both sides of the highway. So we were like, let's just get out of here. Apparently we weren't supposed to know about that, but we did, so that was that. So I get these kind of random encounters, and I never know for sure when they're going to happen. I was living in Vancouver, British Columbia, I think that was before my son was born. Might have been when I was pregnant with him, but I'm not entirely sure. And, again, I was just kind of going to sleep and kind of bored, and I kind of like popped up and just started randomly looking at things from space, looking at Earth from space, which I thought was it's a cool thing to look at Earth from space, and and then I noticed all these um, energy trails kind of thing, um, like streams, highways of thoughts and stuff, and I realized that they were like telepathic highways in certain groups. Like each group had their own kind of stream that they used, and from where I was, I could see all of them, and I could like dip down into one and kind of listen in and see what they're talking about and leave and dip down in another one. It was like, and apparently one of these streams was the new Rosicrucian order. They noticed me, and I went back to my body or whatever, and this guy popped in from the astral. He just like was there in my room, and I immediately knew who he was, not his name, but who he was, that he was from that stream, the Rosicrucians. And he was just looking at me and checking me out, trying to decide if I was like dangerous or just lucky or I don't know what, and decided that I was harmless and dismissed me completely and left. And I was like, okay, that works for me. I'm glad to be harmless and not of too much interest to this particular group at the time. And so um, the wanderings and things that I did on a regular basis, I didn't have like the feeling of being disconnected from here or from me. It was just like almost like a dream state, but not quite. Um, and and I would bring back information and stuff. And I'm thinking that maybe it sort of connected me to some past life knowledge that I had, because like I'd never heard of Barden until I met Ian. So I met him in '91, and I already knew all the stuff that I read in Barden's books. I mean, about the types of beings that were in the different planetary spheres and thought forms and larvae and all that other stuff that's really interesting for me to see corroborated in a text like that, because I had already experienced it and figured it out, having seen thought forms and that kind of thing. Like some of them were really weird, like that hate thought form that came out of Anne's head and floated down the stairs. But I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy books because there were no books written about this kind of stuff. I mean, not that I could find at any rate. No real texts or anything that came across my corner of the world at the time. And so, and no one I knew was dealing with the kinds of abilities that I had. So I had no one I could talk to ask questions of, to sort of get a handle on it, especially being such an extreme empath and, having precognitive and clairvoyant events on a regular basis and popping in and out of my body and so forth. Learning how to ground was very, very difficult for me. It seems not like that now, but it was definitely like that then. I was definitely more out of me than I was in me, and I think that's not an uncommon survival mechanism for people who are in extremely abusive environments, especially when you're a child. It's a way of escape. So when bad things were happening, leaving my body and going somewhere else to not be where things were happening was like a normal occurrence. So I read a lot of fiction, science fiction, and they were they talked in those kinds of books, they talked about people who had powers, special abilities and things. And the authors sort of supposed methods, like one author, they had crystals that they used to control their abilities, and it's like, and creating forms around them, etc. And it gave me ideas of things that I could do to protect myself, or to start the process of learning how to control what was going on around me. And yeah, I had a period of time where other people were seeing me in their houses when I was sleeping in my room. And even up in the Kispiox Valley, I had a couple of occasions when people told me I was at a party I wasn't at, which I thought was weird because I knew where I was, and apparently they thought I was somewhere else. And even when I was pregnant with my son in Vancouver, British Columbia, people said that they saw me as a pregnant woman in bars in Vancouver. And I'm like, no, I never did that. And so learning how to manage and control it and use it effectively has definitely been part of what I've tried to do. Go, and do things when I want to. So the difference between mental travel and astral travel, from a very precise definitional position, is your astral body. If it leaves your physical body, then there's dangers to your physical body. There's the possibility of something going wrong and not getting back. It's sort of more basic to your life force or your life energy. And if it gets disconnected, then you're dead. That seems like a dangerous thing to try. And so mental travel is safer. For one, you're like more removed emotionally, because it doesn't have the same intense emotional content that a true astral travel will have. And so mental travel is easier to control in that sense. And I certainly have used that for certain long distance healings that I've done. Some of those are in other videos where you can like get a more play-by-play of that specific event that I went through, and discovered that, the first time I did something like that in my own imagination, up north in the middle of the Kispiox Valley, on a young girl who had an ulcer in the Okanagan Valley by Kelowna, and she woke up in the morning without an ulcer. The fact that I was physically too far away to affect her in any way whatsoever, and that it had all happened in my own imagination, and yet it had affected her physical body, was pretty much total validation and evidence that it was real. And, I am a skeptical individual. A healthy amount of skepticism when you're following this path is really important, because the potential for becoming mentally derailed by your own ideas or someone else's ideas, and getting sucked into a fantasy reality that doesn't have any actual foundation that you can use in physical reality, is great, because we're dealing with things that are more of the imagination than they are physical substance, because these things aren't happening in the physical world, which is one of the reasons why science has a difficult time trying to quantify it. And the reason it's not repeatable is because personalities are very much a part of how this works, and whether it works or not. And so, mood, health, all sorts of factors are involved in the abilities that we have and manifest, and when they happen, and so forth. There were some cool things that I saw, though. There was one night when I was looking outside at the sky. I think I was in Maryland at that point, and I was with my first husband, and Gary was there. He was the guy who had a hard time staying in his body at all. And I was watching, and I saw these, could only describe them as like fairy dust trails. I mean, they were sparkly trails that would go through the sky. They'd go like this, and it'd be like these different colors of sparkles would just sparkle, 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 and then another one would come in a different direction. And I was watching them, and I could just see them so clear at that moment. And I knew that they were other people who were astral traveling in their dreams, and I was seeing their trails behind, and that was really cool. And there was another time in daylight where I was sitting outside. I don't remember where I was when this happened, just remember seeing it. And I was looking up, and I was seeing the what they describe as the silver cord that attaches your astral body to your physical body. And I could actually see a bunch of different silver cords that were just in the sky. And I didn't see the ends of them, either end of them, either the body that they were coming from or the spirit manifestation of the person. I saw this was like if you were looking at, jet trails or something in the sky, and the jet was already gone. It was that kind of thing. And what I saw that was so fascinating to me were there was a big flock of birds, I think maybe swallows. I'm not sure though. It might have been starlings. And they were swooping and flying through the air, and they were very specifically avoiding those silver cords. They were flying around them. They knew they were there. They could see them. It just seemed as clear as a bell that they could see those things because they made sure not to touch any of them, and they were doing all these patterns and swooping around, avoiding every single one that I could see. And I thought that was pretty awesome. Whether that's helpful or not, I don't know, but it was pretty cool to see anyway. And then in the late 60s, early 70s was when I started to see these two beings. One was from Pluto, and he was like really super tall, kind of like from here down. He was like a black robe, but he was like 8 feet tall, I'd say at least, and his head, which was the only part of him you could really see, was kind of like a skull with really thin skin on it. And then his eyes were these glowing green lights in his eyes. And I wasn't the only one who saw him, which was kind of interesting. One time, this was weird. So, warning. I was at this house in Regina. I was back in Regina, Saskatchewan, and I had to go to the bathroom. So I was sitting on the toilet, and I was, I think, constipated, so I was like pushing. And apparently that pushed part of me out of my body when I was pushing, because as I was pushing, all of a sudden I could see that Plutonian guy and then my friend Gary floating in the air next to him, looking at me while I'm going to the bathroom, which I found obnoxious, but there it was. And so I thought that's weird. And so then I went back out into the living room. There was a little girl there who was probably about 3, I think. And we were sitting in the living room, and I could see that tall spirit being as clear as day. And she was sitting on the floor in another part of the living room, looking right at him, just like straight in the eye. And when he moved, she followed him. And it was so clear that she could see him. Fortunately, she wasn't afraid of him. She was too young, I think, to be afraid of what he looked like. But that was another one of those moments, the validation, is that I see this thing that no one else can see, but then again, apparently this little girl can see the same thing that I'm seeing, or at least something so close it might as well be the same thing because we're looking in the same place, following the same movement. So it isn't just me, because here's this person outside of myself that sees it too. And those are the moments that I look for to know I'm not completely crazy, when I can get some kind of external confirmation of what's going on in my psychic environment, world, or what have you. So it's the thing about meeting spirits in dreams, which was another part of the question, or if I did a lot in one stage of my development, and it was around that time where there was like I had all these questions. I was searching all the time. My spirit guide Moida and I were making a real life connection, uh, stronger than we had when I was little. I used to see her all the time when I was little, but then it faded, and then she came back, and she was just as real as, in some cases, as any other person standing in the room. Um, and she would often come to me in my dream state and teach me things and help me answer questions and so forth. She would also appear in my guided meditational practices and in my general meditations. There was also a phase when I was remembering a lot of past life stuff, sometimes in my dreams, sometimes in a meditation. Things would pop up, and I'd go like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. That's why this is happening this way. And one of the things I learned from that entire period of my life was in the beginning, when I started meeting people that I'd known in other lives, I had this automatic assumption that if I'd known them in another life and I met them in this life, that meant we were supposed to, like, do something together. And it's not true. It doesn't have to be true. It's still a complete and total choice of your own in this life to decide whether or not. And some of them were not as good as they were in the past life. They were like completely obnoxious individuals. Some of them were better, you know. And so I had to let go of some of that sort of ingrained optimistic fantasy of how the world and the universe might work, and get more grounded. I think that was sort of some of the start of trying to become more grounded and learning about what I really thought about things. For a long time, it was the things I read. I read a lot of stuff. I read Rudolf Steiner's stuff. I read Jane Roberts' stuff. I read Edgar Cayce's stuff, as well as Bonowitz and Sybil Leek. And I read some ancient tomes. I read a big, huge book on mediumship. I think I still have it here somewhere. That was probably written in the 1800s. Just trying to get some notions of controlling my abilities within that field and find out as much as I could, or figure out as much as I could to stay sane. And of course, when I had that acid experience that completely shredded my spirit, that didn't help much. Although I learned a lot from it, it still was a pretty intense and distorting experience. But putting myself back together gave me control over a lot of things that I hadn't had before, or the beginnings of control. Even when you start to get the beginnings of that kind of thing, it still takes a long time to actually get a handle on it, and it can be something that you work with for the rest of your life. And the thing is when all these things are happening, life is still going on, so you still have to cook meals and go to the bathroom and have a job and make a living and get transportation and go places. And I remember being really annoyed about that for a long time, because I remembered in the old days that I would be taken care of by like a tribe or a village that I lived in, because my gifts were something that were considered valuable, and they didn't want me to have to do all of that manual labor to just survive. So the village would build me a house, and they would supply me with food, and and that would be payment for my services, which would be to take care of their health and their mental health and their spiritual health, and warn them about dangers that might be coming, and all that other stuff that I would have done in the past, knowing about herbs and helping babies come into the world. And, uh, our economy isn't built that way. We're a completely different kind of structure when it comes to what we value, how we value it, and how we can get what we value to get something we need. So it took a long time for me to accept the reality of where I am in history, I guess. And I've always kind of felt out of step with the rest of the world. Still, I feel out of step. Um, there's so much that doesn't make sense to me. This whole either or kind of thing is confusing. It's like I see it happening online on a daily basis. It's like, I believe in my immune system. Good, so do I. But I also believe that vaccines can help my immune system to fight off a deadly disease so I don't die prematurely. I don't understand why I have to pick one or the other. Why can't I do both? That kind of thing. That sort of line in the sand thinking that's going on in my country at the moment, which is very strange. And that kind of apparent lack of social responsibility or uh, sort of abandonment of the social contract, that taking care of people you don't know is just as important as taking care of people you do know, and their lives matter too. So it's sort of a weird feeling. But wherever you land on that, I think that science and magic work together really well, and that's where I'm at. I don't see a conflict between them. I don't see any reason why they can't coexist and boost one another and help one another in all sorts of different ways. And apparently there's a movement right now through the New Age community. I read an article where people have decided that their spiritual awareness of what's going on in their bodies and the world around them is so great that they can avoid getting sick because they will be warned that it's coming. And I'm like, yeah, well, okay, well, hope you don't have an off day, because that would be really sucky. Um, so again, using everything at my disposal. So let me think. It's like my magical reality and my normal physical reality are so intertwined at this point, they don't feel like there's a separation between them. I try to stay alert as often as I can to something that might be coming my way. Um, if a sign happens, I try to pay attention if it's something that I recognize as a sign. If I have a dream, I try to pay attention to what it might be telling me. I definitely had a dream before the pandemic that warned me about what was coming and how bad it was going to be, and paying attention, trying to survive, to be alert. But small things, it doesn't have to be like all in and nothing else kind of thing. It's like we're a combination of a lot of stuff. We're multifaceted, multidimensional beings, and sometimes we have to take care of the people around us, the house that we're in, the food that we need to cook, or the plants that we're taking care of. And, sometimes we have to go to work at a job we may not like, but that doesn't mean we can't fulfill our spiritual needs, in other ways. And it's like the idea that we're going to be just doing one thing all the time seems narrow-minded, in the sense that it it sort of narrows our focus to the exclusion of the rest of reality, and we live in a large reality filled with other people and things that are going on. So one of the reasons I share some of the difficulties that we go through is to show you that you don't have to always be this ideal perfection of some kind of magical being or whatever in order to be making an impact or doing good things or having a worthwhile life in existence or fulfilling your purpose. It's like sometimes it's the little things that add up over the years, and then you can look back and like find out how many people you have helped with a kind word or with an awareness of what's going on in their lives, and with a noticing something and reminding them to notice something, and listening, learning how to listen to other people and learn about their struggles and their awakenings and their realizations and so forth. And it is a very fulfilling existence when you're not trying to define it all through a narrow lens of this is all we are, or this is all we should work on, or all we should focus on. So, if you don't celebrate the full moon and make moon water, there's going to be another moon coming along. Although the whole moon water thing is not something I'm all that interested in. Other people apparently just really like it, and so I'm glad they have something they can do. But it's every single moment doesn't have to be that kind of focus. It's okay to have off days and sick days and play days and fun days, and the universe is just all around us all the time, no matter what we're doing. So the better able we are to tune into ourselves and to be in our life, the more likely we are to notice when we need to notice something and figure out what it is. So if you are traveling through the ether and the astral and the mental planes and so forth, just remember to take care of your body at the same time, and take care of your needs, and don't be too exhausted, and don't be over the top with everything that you're doing, and try to stay balanced, because the balance is the important thing when it comes to this for your mental, physical health and well-being. And then have fun exploring new worlds and trying to figure out what that means. So I guess that's it for some random stories that pop in my head at a time, trying to talk about a subject, and who knows where I ended up with that. But hope you all are having a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys tomorrow on our live show. And if you have any questions that you want me to address, you can either put them in a comment, or you can send me an email at Siofra's Magic Alcove at gmail.com. It's not under my full name. Or you can send me a friend's request at Siofra Bradigan on Facebook. So, till we see you later, and we have figured out the echo. We should not have any more echo. So, yay for Ian and his technical ability and troubleshooting to figure out what the heck was going on. So, this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. Blessed be.